This is it. This is where I'm supposed to be. And as a black,
why we as Americans have to reconnect with our roots.
The depth of suffering and the height of joy that these songs can articulate.
One way that we can explain the Mother of God is in song. My mother.
So how did we get where we are today? A discernible shift in the place of
Fighting what is most important in our lives.
Lighten my darkness. The Holy Spirit is able to.
He said, if you're going to participate in the movement, you've got to prepare yourself.
That my great-grandfather built in 1875. My great-grandfather built that house. My grandfather was born and raised in that house. My father was born and raised in that house. I was born and raised in that house. And as I like to say, now I'm raising my children here, although they have long since left and flown the coop. But they're back this weekend for my birthday, for my 71st birthday. I grew up in these Ozark Mountains as a third generation pastor's son. My relatives were founding members of this town, and they were actually relatives of Daniel Boone. Nathan Boone is my great-great-great-grandfather, Daniel Boone's son. And Caroline Booneberry is my great-grandmother. Caroline was his daughter. And this property that I now live on once belonged to Caroline and William Berry, my great-grandparents. And, I grew up in a most idyllic setting because my parents had the foresight to guard us from the turmoil that was brewing during the 1950s and 1960s. I know one of the questions asked me about something about my relationship with my mother, but that can't be told unless I speak about my relationship with my father. My father was a broken-hearted man, and he spent most of my childhood and most of his young adulthood up until his mid mid 30s in the penitentiary, off and on in the penitentiary. He was brokenhearted. He had just come back from World War II, 5 years after I was born. He was with the Black Army Corps of Engineers, and they helped rewire Nagasaki after the bomb. And my father was not able to join the electricians union because he was Black. And that was a different America than we have now, no matter what some people and naysayers may say about the lack of progress that we have made in this country. We have made certain progress. We have made certain progress as it relates to men. The part where we have not made such progress in America is our inability to come to grips with our past. So my father suffered from that. He was somewhat of an armchair Bible scholar, and he loved the Psalms. Every morning he would sit at the kitchen table and read the Psalms and Proverbs. And I remember one particular proverb that he loves so much, and I carry it in my heart today, and in the way that I relate to other people. And he used to say that a brother offended, from Proverbs, a brother offended is harder to be won than a strong city captured. And I've kept this as part of my my creed, part of my life's recognition, to know that if you offend your brother, it's very difficult. It's very difficult, oftentimes impossible to mend. So be careful with how you treat one another. Be careful about how you put the pressure on your brother and sister. Take your foot off your brother's neck and give him a little bit of chance to take a breath, and you'll find that you may have a strong ally. As the proverb said, a brother offended is harder to be won than a strong city captured. So this is a little bit about my childhood. I was raised in this little town and guarded from certain things that many people from the 50s and 60s suffered from. I remember writing a poem when I was a young man for 4-H. I was a member of 4-H because we were all farmers around here, and we had our little 4-H jackets on, and everybody had a 4-H project. And I had a little calf, a Guernsey calf, as part of my project. And I remember this was in 1963, and this was a time when we were in the midst, at the beginning of the Vietnam War. And it wasn't so much, it wasn't so publicized as it did in the coming years from 1963. But I remember my dear cousin, who my mom helped raise, and we loved him because he was like our brother. He lived in our house. His name was Daniel Sharp, and Dan came home from the Vietnam in a body bag. He was killed in Laos when the Americans said that there were no American troops in Laos, but there were soldiers coming home in body bags. And I wrote this poem for my 4-H about Dan, and actually it was about our situation in America. And the poem went like this. It says, "Why must I go across the sea and fight for a country that doesn't belong to me? They say that I'm part of my country's might. I'm not good enough to vote, but I'm good enough to fight. I'm not complaining. Where I live is pretty good, but I can't change it for the others if only I could. I always had this sense that I had somewhat of a privileged life in these Ozark Mountains. It was almost like a little place that time forgot, and where I was guarded from all danger. But I knew that other people all around me were suffering tremendously. I was a young white man who was in part of my class. He was one of my classmates. I'm telling you this, but because you have to understand that I was 15 years old before the Voting Rights Act passed. And that may seem like, that's an impossible thing, but I was nearly an adult by the time that, everyone in this country was eligible to vote. African-American people, that is. At the flagpole in our schoolyard in the 8th grade, my friend came up to me, and he was a white fellow from this town. I was the only Black person in my class, and only one of 4 Black children in that school. And the other 2 people were my cousins, and the other one was my brother, of course. And Bill Jones came up to me and he said, I got to tell you something. No matter what happens during this civil rights mess that we're having in this country, we will always be friends. And my parents used to, they used to guard me from this turmoil that was brewing in this country. And I thought, well, Bill is such a crazy boy. I don't even know what he's talking about. But you know, I loved him and he seemed sincere. So I shook my head and said, "Yeah, you're right, Bill." And then later I found out what he meant, because that very next year I left home. I decided that I would go out on the road and take off on my own. So have we spoken enough about this early childhood?
Yeah, sure. My question is,
You give me clues, because I can go on and on.
I'll try to interrupt you where I can. You talked about your being the son and grandson of a pastor. How did the faith of your parents influence your early life, or did it?
My early life?
Early life, yeah.
Well, you know, we were brought up in the church. We loved the church. You know, this was where everything was, anything was possible in the church. The black church in that time was more than just, you know, a place to go and you know, to have your Bible lessons and hear your sermons. It was a gathering place. It was a safe place for people during the 1950s and 60s in my lifetime to meet and to find some peace where we couldn't find in this world. We had to be careful. We had to be careful about almost everything. It was sort of like an unspoken care that we had, and to watch what we did and to watch what we said. We didn't have to watch it so much in church. So it influenced me a great deal. You know, it's also the place where we learned a little bit about Black history, because we had, I think one of the biggest things that happened, one of the most terrible things and almost wonderful things, but inevitable things that happened to the African American community was integration. Because integration, once you integrate, you have to become part of a whole. And we gave up so much of our community. We gave up so much of our solidarity in order to become part of the greater community. Remember a time when in places like Jefferson City, Missouri, where my other grandparents lived, and you could find people who were drunkards living next door to people who were lawyers, and lawyers living next door to doctors, and all in the same block, living next door to janitors, living next door to, you know, all sorts of people. The Black community was actually a community that that held all of our brothers and sisters. And once integration began, we began to disperse. Our community began to disperse, and we became part of the greater American society, which had to happen, I suppose. It did happen, so there we have it. But it was also quite a tragic thing that we would have to give up so much in order to become part of the whole. We had to even give up our church life, you know, because at one time our African American church, when I was young, and the preachers that I heard relied primarily on the aid of God to come to their defense in time of need. And now, after this integration had occurred, we relied not on God only, but we also relied on man's laws. We were no longer subject to, I'm trying to be a little poetic now, we were no longer subject to man's whips and chains, but we were subject to the whips and chains of modernity. We were subject to find our consolation in the courts and not in God. We could rely on God's favor, no longer. And in so doing, we gave up part of our birthright. We gave up a part of that which our ancestors had struggled for so long.
So during this time desegregation was really happening. I guess we're talking late 60s, early 70s.
Excuse me?
Where were you when you left home? What happened? I know, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe there was like what I'll call a prodigal son time where you left.
Yeah.
What did you do, and how did you come back home? How did that happen?
Well, I from the time I was 16 until the time I was 21, I was on, as we would say, on the road, where I was a flower child, as some people refer to it. You know, I found that I could find solidarity with a certain group of people, that I had found my homeland, so to speak, with these people who did not care so much for, for this world, didn't care so much for the modern times and modern way of thinking, although our way was oftentimes quite corrupt. And nonetheless, we had our own society. So I left home and went to San Francisco, and that's where I lived for a long time. And coming back to Jefferson City, Missouri, where my parents had moved, and and always getting into trouble because I sold drugs, sold marijuana, and I would come back and have near misses with the law, near scrapes with the law. One time I remember being in Jefferson City, Missouri, downtown, and we were driving this car, and my friend Robert and I, Robert of blessed memory, we did everything together. We call ourselves the Cosmic Coloreds. That's humorous, Cosmic Coloreds. And Robert and I came back to Jefferson City, and the police surrounded our car, and they searched our car, and of course they found nothing in there because we knew not to have anything in our car as we traveled, in the city. And but late that night when we were at home, the police once again came to our car, and with sirens, the whole thing, and they searched our car again, and they couldn't find anything. Because later that night, someone went to my car and found the drugs that they had planted in our car, and so that was a near escape. And I avoided these, I had all near escapes until I was 20 years old, and I was having lots of drugs that we had brought into this town because there was a black university, which was a traditional black school called Lincoln University, which was founded by 5 Civil War veterans. So when I came back to that town, I was arrested and thrown in jail. They couldn't get a warrant to search our house, so the police set our house on fire and came in with the fire department. And I was put in a 4.5-foot cell by 6.5 foot with 12-foot ceiling and no windows. It was referred to as the mean camp. That jail was built during the Civil War, and it was the living conditions in there were so horrible and so horrific that it's unspeakable. I wouldn't even talk about some of the things that happened in that penitentiary in this setting, but it was horrible. And I recall being in this solitary confinement and praying to God, and I prayed to Him with all my heart, with all my mind, with all my soul. I have not made a more sincere prayer before that, or after that, or since that. Have I made such a sincere prayer to the Lord? And I asked Him, and I begged Him, and I said, if you help me, Lord, if you help me, I will serve you. And later that night, I looked under my jail cell door, which was about maybe 4 or 5 inches tall, where they would slide your food under there on trays. And I saw a man in the hall, and they were beating him with a transistor radio wrapped in a towel. And every time that he would pass out, they would pee in his face to revive him. These were sadistic jailers, none like we have today. And every time that he would pass out, they would beat him all the more until he would survive. And I prayed, I said, Lord, didn't you hear my prayer? If you would help me, I would serve you. I didn't know what to do. I was only 20 years old, just a boy, really, no matter how grown I thought I was or how I thought I had been around. I was also, saved by God. I was saved by God in the fact that he first put me in the solitary confinement. Because if I had been put in the regular population, heaven knows what would have become of me. But I was put in solitary confinement. And so that night, after they beat this man so terribly, the next day the guards came to my cell door, my jail cell door, and they said to me, "Get on your clothes, you're going home." And I said, aha, no, they won't do that to me. I'm not going out in that hall. They'll have to drag me out. That was the dialogue that I was having with myself. And finally they said, well, just stay in there. We don't care. We want you to be in there anyway. And then I was even all the more perplexed because I thought, should I stay or should I go? So I went outside of there and they took me down to process me out, and they gave me everything. They gave me all my clothes. They gave me everything but this pair of Tony Lama cowboy boots I had, which I guess somebody thought, the perfect fit. I think I'll keep these. Any rate, when I went out, I got a cab to go to my lawyer's office because we had money, ill-gotten gains. And I went to my lawyer's office. And on the way to my lawyer's office, there was a voice that seemed to be resounding within that cab, or maybe it was outside the cab, or maybe it was inside of me. I do not know. But there was a voice that said, if I help you, you will serve me, which was part of my prayer that I made to the Lord. If you help me, I will serve you. So I thought, oh my goodness. He just helped me. And I thought, my goodness. So I went to the lawyer, and the lawyer said, you all have just dodged the bullet. He didn't say that, dodged the bullet, but that was the idea. You just narrowly escaped. And because one of the arresting officers who was a good man, decided that he would come clean about our arrest. And he said that it was illegal search and entry because although they found 15 pounds of drugs, nonetheless, they said it was illegal search and entry, and they let us go. And so I went straight back to our house, I don't know what we would call it, maybe dope house. And anyway, I went straight back there, and on the way back there, after I had made that promise to God and God delivered me, on the way back there, I was like a man who beheld himself in the mirror and turned around and straightway forgot what manner of man that he was. And I began to sing to myself, much like Charles Dickens said in his book, A Christmas Carol, when the ghost of Christmas past had come to visit Scrooge. And he said the next morning when he was in his right mind, so-called right mind, he said to himself, perhaps it was a piece of undigested meat concerning his vision. That's what I was saying. Perhaps this whole idea about God helping me out was maybe that was just sort of like a little, I don't know, who knows? That's the way things go. And, so I fought against that for many years. And so.
Your parents were not Orthodox Christians.
No.
How did you get from now coming home at 21 to arriving at that church where you saw the icon of Saint Moses.
You know, when I arrived back in trying to change my mind, I was trying to run away from that vision, from that experience in jail for a long time, and I moved to Hawaii. I moved to Hawaii to a place called Manoa Valley. Manoa Valley is like a rich folks place. We lived in a house rental property that was owned by that this actor named Pat Boone. You're probably too young. Some of you are not. The old guys up here, which I recognize, are not. But Pat Boone, he had a rental house, and so we rented his house, and when I finally came back to my senses, I thought I will be part of my old church. And when I went to my old church, I found it stripped bare. It was a regular American church. It was not the church of my ancestors. It was not the church that they would plead and beg and ask God to help them because there was no other help. It was a church of civil rights. And I'm not against civil rights, as you know, if you know me at all. But it's not salvific. It's just a way of finding some consolation on this earth. But it's very far from the suffering that man has to encounter in order to enter the kingdom of heaven. Because unless our righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees, we shall in no wise enter into the kingdom of heaven. So all the amount of fairness that can be given to us from man amounts to about nothing in the kingdom of heaven. So there I was without a church, and I didn't know what to do. So I went back to San Francisco and sort of united myself with sort of new age groups, because at least they had something that I didn't recognize in any church, in any American church that I had encountered. They had this certain sense of otherworldliness. As I was saying, they depended on the otherworldliness. That's the way I interpreted it. That's the way I saw it. I think that's actually the way that God was leading me and the whole generation of people, not just me. A whole generation of people were leading them in this path toward otherworldliness. So when I found out that folks like Yogananda and all these guys who walk through walls, that we had saints within our church, within the Orthodox Church, who made them look like children, who would give their life for the faith. That's the kind of Christianity that I wanted. Although, of course, I was not ready and am not ready to give my life for the faith. Nonetheless, so that's what led me to find that church, because I couldn't find what I was looking for anywhere in that I knew
about. Practically speaking, where was the church? Where were you? And had you met your wife yet at this point, or were you? Oh
yeah, we met.
Tell me about that, because I don't know anything about it.
About what?
Meeting your wife.
Oh well, my wife and I were part of a New Age Christian group, and we fell in love at first sight. We lived in Boston, Massachusetts, and it was love at first sight. And I didn't like this feeling I was having, because I never imagined myself, marrying a person who was Jewish. I couldn't even imagine such a thing. It wasn't part of how I thought. Not just Jewish, really, if you want to know, a white person. Although, I've had experience with many people from different races. I couldn't imagine marrying somebody, but when I met her, it was love at first sight. I asked her to go on a date with me, and she said okay. And so I went to her house, which was in Jamaica Plains, Massachusetts, which is a suburb of Boston. It's part of Boston actually. And I went to the door and I went, oh my goodness, what am I doing here? I'm actually going to go on a date with this woman. So I said to her, I went to the door and I said, well, I think I changed my mind about that date. I think we can't have it tonight. And so she said, yes, we are. We're going on the date right now. And so we marched down to the down to the subway to catch the train to Cambridge to go to the Club Casablanca, where there was like a jazz bar, and we just fell in love. We were dear friends. And all of our life, I'm sorry that this sounds a little far-fetched, but we never had a fight in our whole life. We never had a fight. Of course, like we had disagreements about certain things, but we never had a fight. It was just one of those things that God had sent. I asked for a wife, and God sent me a wife, and so that's how it was with us. We ended up in New York City as part of our mission. Actually, as a matter of fact, we ended up going to Mother Catherine's father's church in Harlem, St. Philip's Episcopal Church in Harlem. This was during the This was during the angel dust epidemic, which spread the country in 1978 and 79. In 1979, we went to St. Philip's Episcopal Church to help out with the youth ministry there. And it was a time where we had pledged ourselves, to help people. That was part of our mission. Part of our brotherhood's mission was to help our brothers and sisters, to reverence what others revered. That was part of our mission. And so we were there in New York City, in Harlem, and very much in love, working with these little angel dust addicted children in Harlem. And they would look after, they used to, these little gang members. There was one gang called the BKs, it was called the Black Killers. And the Black Killers used to escort Magdalena home from the subway when she worked at Columbia University at that time. And they would escort her home from the subway. And they referred to me as Brother K for Carl. Brother K, they said, we're going to escort Brother K's light-skinned friend. Because they couldn't come to the grip, they couldn't come to the understanding that she was this white person living in the middle of Harlem. So, we lived there in Harlem, and as the song of that era said, if you get lost between the moon and New York City, the best that you can do is fall in love. And we fell in love, and we were inseparable from that time on. And we've been struggling, and she has been taking care of me, and I've been taking care of her, and thanking the Lord every moment. So that's a little bit about that you don't know. When we came to that church in Richmond, Virginia, it was called St. Cyprian of Carthage Church. And I remember going there, and many of our friends by that time had been introduced to Orthodoxy, and they were becoming Orthodoxy. Some of our friends were even, now it's part of the so-called uncanonical Eastern Orthodox Church. And it was uncanonical. It does not mean that they were far from holy or far from the truth. As a matter of fact, in some instances, they may have been closer to a man's reckoning. But nonetheless, many of my friends had already become Orthodox. And there we were, visiting our friend in Richmond, Virginia. We had driven down from Atlanta, Georgia to visit our friend John Koch and Koch, as I think that's pronounced it, to visit John. And of course, it was going to be a nice evening. We're going to go around with John, have a nice time. We were young people, And John said, let's go to this church. And I thought, oh my goodness, we've driven all the way from Atlanta to Richmond, Virginia, nonstop, having a good time, driving fast, getting stopped by the police, getting dragged to the police station for speeding and let go because God was with us. As my mom used to say, God has mercy on the old folks and fools. And as you can tell, I wasn't that old. So you know what category I must have fallen into. And so there we were visiting this church, this Eastern Orthodox church, which I did not want to go to. But Magdalena, being much more civilized, said, let's go. And we went there, and I remember seeing a sign in the yard, and I thought it said Russian Orthodox. But as later I found out it didn't say that, it just said Orthodox. And I went up the back stairs of this place, and I thought, oh my goodness, this isn't even really a church. And there were other people, maybe one or two people going up the stairs at the same time. And I didn't even have any regard for that which they held sacred, because I thought this was just a silly thing anyway. And so we went into the church, and it was very foreign looking to me. They had little plaques all over the wall of icons and so forth. And I thought, my goodness, what a strange place. And I've been in some strange places by that time. And I looked around and I saw the choir. It was comprised of 3 people. And I later imagined that it must have been the priest's wife and one of the faithful, and maybe perhaps his daughter. And I thought, this isn't even really a choir. I said it out loud in the church. Not screaming, but in a normal voice. And then the choir began to sing. I listened to the choir, and the choir said, "Rejoice, thou through whom God will flash forth. Rejoice, thou through whom the curse will cease. Rejoice, revile of fallen Adam. Rejoice, redemption of the curse of Eve. Rejoice, thou bride and wedded." And I was cut to the quick. I had never heard such things as these in my life. I had never heard such sincere melody since I was a child in that church before integration. And then the church went on to say, "The wise children did not adore the golden idol, but went themselves into the flames and defied the pagan god. They prayed in the midst of the flames, and an angel bedewed them. The prayer of your lips has been heard." What words? Who could put such sentences together? How can you make such utterance from the English language that would say something that would disregard the barriers that you might throw up? And I thought to myself, this is so wonderful. You know, I suffered from dyslexia all my life, and I didn't read my first book until I went to the penitentiary. That was the first book that I read at 20 years old, because God had helped me there. And somehow or another, I was able to overcome this. And I overcame it for many years until the last couple of years. And my old age is starting to come back a bit, but not like it was. And then the choir sang, this was in the Catholics, to the Mother of God. And the choir began to sing concerning Mary. They say, she, the Mother of God, that is to say, she makes most eloquent orators as dumb as fish. And I thought, aha, this is where real intelligence lies. Real intelligence, because I always knew I was smart. I always knew that it didn't, like your intelligence didn't have anything to do with whether or not you could read. I already knew that. I knew farmers who could diagnose your cow's illness at a glance before the veterinarian could. I knew that already. And so there is this song saying about the Mother of God, who makes most eloquent orators as dumb as fish. The whole of the life of salvation for mankind resides in that Akathis to the Mother of God, which they sang the first time I went to that church. And then also went on to say, the wise children did not adore the golden idol, which I've been adoring in one form or another and still do to one form or another all my life. The wise children did not adore the golden idol, but went themselves into the flames and defied the pagan god. They prayed in the midst of the flames, and an angel bedewed them. The prayer of your lips has been heard. So we have reminiscent utterances during the Akathis that we sang today from that same Akathis, because that's the prototype that these particular kind of Akathis come from. The wise children did not adore the golden idol, but went themselves into the flames and defied the pagan god. And an angel bedewed them. Brothers and sisters, angels bedew us quite often and at various times. Let that be your refreshment in the midst of the flames. And after we left, I was walking on air and I said, I'm going to become Orthodox. I'm going to become Orthodox. That's it. The priest came out of the iconostasis and he said, and he was started to incense the church. And I thought, aha, incense. You know, in my mind, I was already in the midst of heaven and in the midst of hell. And my mind was saying, oh, how lovely, such a scent. And at the other side of my mind was saying, aha, it must be covering. Do you know what incense is? It covers some sort of odor. It masks something. So beware. And then the choir sang, the prayer of Saint Simeon. And I knew that it was from Psalms. And I was quite moved once again. And afterwards, I thought, aha, I know what these guys are doing. They're playing a trick on me. And they had this icon of Saint Cyprian of Carthage, who looked like black man. And they had an icon on the other side of the iconostasis who was of Saint Moses the Black, our patron saint, and looks after those who are brokenhearted. And I thought, aha, I remember going through that neighborhood. It was predominantly black. And so they're doing this as some sort of outreach to the African-American community here. And they're trying to fool these people into thinking that they are welcome here. I know that old trick. That's what my mind said to me at that point. And I said that to the priest after the service was over. And he said, and he pointed on the wall, he said, the church is full of so many people. The church is full of all kinds of people. We have St. John Maximovich, and then we have St. Peter the Aleut, and we have the martyrs of the Boxer Rebellion, Chinese. We have all kinds of representatives of mankind on our walls. And don't you understand that God is no respecter of person? And I saw for the first time depicted on the walls of our church, not just some little cute decorations that was appealing to our senses, to our artistic sensibility, or even into our liking, which told some magnificent story. But at that point, it also pointed out to me that in Christ there is no east or west, no free man, no bondsman, no black or white. And these are the things that help bring about salvation for mankind. It's not those little things that we cling to so tenaciously as we are being dragged down to hell alive.
find I'm encouraged by your friend John, who just decided to bring you that day. It's encouraging
Oh, yes.
to think about bringing people to church
Yes,
who
yes.
don't want to go.
Because then it's not up to us. Our job is to, as it says in the scripture, our job is to invite them to the feast. Our job is not to take care of things. Of course, we had to take care of certain things, but our job is not to make sure that everything happens properly according to our inability to see a foot in front of us. But our job is to bring them and to invite them to the feast. When they're invited to the feast, then it's between them and God. We help, of course, along the way.
So from there, you're journeying towards the faith. You go back to Atlanta, I'm assuming. As a Black man, this would have been, I'm assuming, the early 80s, just on your timeline you're giving me.
Yes.
What was it like coming into the church, the Orthodox Church? Was there resistance?
There was resistance. There was all kinds of resistance that many of you don't know about. We all have different struggles. We have different struggles, and even people who are my contemporaries, who they have their different struggles. We all do, of course. And as I used to say, that one man's equations might be 2 and 5, which equals 7. Another man's equation might be 3 and 4, which equals 7. Another's might be 6 and 1, which equals 7. We all get 7s. And we all have the struggle. But you see, I had a little different struggle. And I remember when we were deciding part of the Orthodox Church, of the canonical Orthodox Church. When we decided to become part of it, it was a wonderful thing because here we are. We'd already started churches around the country, and we had a little church here in Ash Grove that we had established. It was a little small church, a little converted building, but people were coming to this church, and through the grace of God, they were coming and saying, "Oh my goodness, this is such a lovely place," and we didn't even know. Well, some people did, but I didn't even know what I was doing. But we decided that we would become part of the Orthodox Church. And my friend, Father Alexei, and Mother Musa, and Mother Bridget, and who else was with us that day? Mother Taisia from Holland. We decided that we would petition the Serbian Church, and we would become part of the Serbian Church if they would have us. And we went there, and Bishop Longing, such a gracious man. If you've never met him, look forward to doing so. He was such a gracious man. He said, "Oh, yes, please come. You become part of it, blah, blah, blah." He gave us little books. I shouldn't say blah, 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 because it made me sound a little bit disrespectful. No disrespect meant. He gave us these little books, and, and it was very nice. And then he said, "We'll write you a letter." And we waited for the letter. Father Alexei told me, everybody got a letter except for me. And I wondered, why didn't I get a letter? The other guys got letters, which said, become part of our church. And I didn't get a letter. So finally, the dean of the Serbian church, who the other people, the acceptance committee in the Serbian church did not know that was our dear friend. He was actually my wife's confessor. And he was a friend of ours and we were dear friends because we lived in St. Louis together, and we just were attracted to one another, and we became friends. And he called me and said, "Father Moses, I'm leaving the church because they say they had a council of presbyters at that time. They were made up of older guys. And older guys think sometimes that they have something to protect. Older guys are not willing to listen to the call because they're so set in their ways. Beware of older guys, which you are rapidly becoming." At any rate, So I said, no, Father, if you do such a thing as that, you will no longer be my friend. We can never be friends if you did such a thing. And he said, well, I don't know what to do. But meanwhile, my people here, my congregation, were confounded, and they didn't know what to do. And I thought back on a time in the 1970s when we lived in St. Louis. No, it was oh my goodness, in 1995 when we lived in St. Louis, and we just gotten a new car, and I was driving that car. It was like a new fast car, and when I had less sense, I like to drive fast. And I was driving down the highway, and I saw a man, a priest, actually had on Podraznik and pectoral cross. As it turned out, his name was Father Demetrius Vincent. And Father Demetrius was standing on the side of the road with a box, hitchhiking across the Eads Bridge from Missouri, St. Louis, to Illinois. And I thought, oh my goodness. And I pulled over and I said, can I help you? He said, yes, my car broke down and I have a box of liturgical supplies that I must rush to our clergy conclave, which we're having in Evanston, Illinois, and I'm supposed to bring the supplies. So I said, get in, I'll take you. He goes, it's quite a ways. And I said, okay, great, all the better. So I drove him there, and we got there to the hotel where they were having their convention, and he said, I want you to meet my bishop. And I said, okay, great. I'd like to meet your bishop. I was, I don't know why I said that so readily, because usually I'm more standoffish. That's one of the things that I suffer from sometimes. And so I went there and to meet the bishop, and I was so taken by him because he was normal. And by that, I don't mean like, incorrect, but he was normal. He said, oh, hello, I'm glad to meet you. My name is Archbishop Job. And he gave me a blessing. He said, would you like a Coke? Oh my goodness, what a normal thing to say when someone comes to your suite. May I offer you some refreshment? And he offered, and I said, yeah, I didn't even like Coke and don't like it now. But I said, yeah, and it was the best Coke I ever had. And he said, if there's ever anything I can do for you, please let me know. Now, all these years, 10 years later, here we are being turned down from that church. And there we were. And it came to my mind, Bishop Job. So I called him up and I said, Bishop Job, this is my situation. He said, we'll come to Chicago and we'll interview you. Me and some other priests will interview you to see if you're eligible. So I came there and, it was more like an interrogation on some of those people's part than an interview. Or maybe it wasn't an interrogation. Maybe it's just because I was so ignorant that it seemed like an interrogation. Nonetheless, at one point I thought, well, my goodness, this is going to be too much for me. So I said, I'm going to sabotage myself. Have you ever said such things as that to yourself? I'm going to sabotage myself. And I said, the next question they asked me, I'm gonna give a smart aleck answer to. And they asked me, well, something or another about liturgical life. And I said, well, I'll tell you one thing. No matter if you invite me to the OCA church or not, I'm never going to use that little red book that you all have. What a dumb thing to say. It had nothing to do with anything. It didn't fit in. And I said, I'll never use that little red book that you guys use. Bishop Job said, I don't like that book either. I went, okay, that didn't work. I'll try something else. Next question they asked me, and I said, I'll tell you one thing. No matter what happens, I'll never become New Calendar. Never. Bishop Job said, oh, we all used to be Old Calendar. And I went, oh, okay. So then he said, this was in the 1st of November. He said, I'm going to come down there to Missouri and chrismate your people on the 15th of Missouri, of November. Then I'm going to have you up here a couple of days before Thanksgiving and make you a priest make you a bishop, a deacon on Friday, and make you a priest on Saturday, and you can go home in order to serve liturgy on Thanksgiving. And those people who were in that room, which will remain unnamed, they were livid. They did not like that he would say such things. But maybe he had insight that maybe I would make an effort, and I've been trying to make an effort. And so that's how I became part of the church. This has been a struggle. This has been, as far as, there are things that we have to deal with. I have dealt with certain things that have to do with race. Luckily, I recognize them as not flesh and blood. Not flesh and blood in the sense of, people's shortcomings, people's meanness, and people's insults. I recognize them as being war in high places, war not with flesh and blood, but with principalities and dominions. There are such things, brothers and sisters, that rule us, that have dominion over us, who toss us about like a leaf in the wind. This storms from the evil one. So, these are some of the things I've suffered with in this church.
What year were you welcomed into the OCA?
2000.
2000. Were there other Black priests in the country at the time? Do you know?
There were none. Well, in 2000, no, there were none. There were none. Father Jerome became priest a year or so later. Father Jerome Sanderson, part of our brotherhood, part of our fellowship, and but then again there were none, and then there were a couple more added who became part of the church here and there. But I used to say, Lord, I want to see another African American priest in the Orthodox Church before I die. But now that I'm old and feeble, I changed that prayer. I changed it just a little bit. Just let me see about 50 more. So, because I want to live a little longer. That's humorous, brother. So, at any rate, I went to Chicago. Went to when my wife and I before we became Orthodox, we lived in St. Louis, and there was a great church in that town, a cathedral, which had these beautiful mosaics, and one of the they were having an open house at this great cathedral, Orthodox cathedral, and I went there, and it was an open house. People from all over the community were there, and I was there. I was dressed properly, because I used to like to dress with fancy clothes. I was dressed properly, and the secretary of the church came over to where I was, and she said, "May I help you?" There were all kinds of people in there, and no one else was being asked, "Can I help you?" I knew what that meant. So Black man in America, I knew what that meant. So I said, "No, you can't." So she went and got the priest, and the priest came over to where I was, and he said, "May I help you?" And I said, "Well, Father, I'm interested in joining the Orthodox Church, and I just came by to look at the mosaics and the whole thing." And he said, "I think you would be happier at the Coptic Church." I was so wounded. I said, "I'll never go by that church again." I used to go out of my way to make a circle around the church when I was going in that area, because I didn't even want to see it anymore. Years later, a friend of mine said, who was actually a dear friend of mine, I guess I call him my god nephew, was a priest. He became Greek priest. And he said, "Father, we're having a Sunday of Orthodoxy at our church, and we'd like to know if you could come and give the address. And I said, oh my goodness, this is this Godson asking me to do this thing. I'll say yes. So I said, okay. And he said, so I went there and I told that story. And this little old Greek lady comes up to me, and she's just like dressed, she looks like a Greek lady out of a book, you know, with the black and the little veil on. She comes over to me and she starts crying. And she said, I was that secretary that you mentioned in your story. And she starts crying. And we're standing in this big hall, and I start crying. And we're both standing there crying, and everything got silent. And she said, oh, Father, please forgive Father so-and-so, because, you know, he was sort of like a, you know, an anxious man. Please forgive him. And I said, I forgive him, but you have to understand that he was only trying to protect that which he thought might be in jeopardy of someone.
Say that one more time, Father. You cut out a little bit. What did he say?
I said, you know, the Father was not being a bad man. He was just trying to protect that which he thought was his to protect, the church. He didn't know that God called me to come to that church. He didn't know that. So let's forgive him. It wasn't his fault. And so she said, great. And so we just kind of held hands for a moment. And it was a wonderful, wonderful meeting. I'm saying this to you. I'm saying that last part to you, because the truth of the matter is that offenses will come in our life. And people will say things and do things which might seem most malicious to us. But in fact, they usually come not from a person's meanness. I've met some real mean people in my life. And you probably won't meet a lot of them. Most of the people who offend you will be people who are trying to protect themselves or trying to put you in your place, who are suffering from some sort of madness. But forgive everyone that trespasses against you. Forgive everyone that trespasses against you. Because I'll tell you what, there will be a time when you're on your knees and you will say to the Lord, oh, I have such a multitude of sins. I don't even know where to begin to clear this out. And the Lord will say to you, as he said to me, this is not guessing, I'm telling you the truth right now. The Lord will say to you, if you don't forgive your brother who has offended you, then neither will I forgive you. And you will be finding yourself in such an error, in a vast valley of pain.
That's beautiful. That harkens back to where we started on a brother offended is better one than a city captured. Oh, that'll stick with me. Father, we've got 10 minutes, and I could ask other questions about your life, but I think if anyone has questions, go ahead and raise your hand, and I'll ask. I'll just give a brief little summary of what we were going to talk about. Was you started a museum, and you were actively participating in the Fellowship of St. Moses. But I'll ask this. You jokingly say, you'd want to see 50 more African-American priests before you die. But it's important work, outreach to the African-American community in the United States. And it's the work that we're doing here as a fellowship. For those of us out here in the world separated from one another by physical space, what can we be doing to outreach and minister to, particularly, I'll say in this context, the African-American community? And of course, yeah, go ahead.
I said, well, what we do is we do the best we can. We invite people to our church. We have, we have a certain sense of certain, it could be wrong, but we have a sense of people that may be attracted to our church. We invite them to our church. We be kind to them. In all my days. People always ask me, Father Moses, how do you reach out to the African American community? But no one has ever asked me, ever, how do you reach out to the white community? How do you reach out to the hillbilly community? Because it's a ridiculous question when it comes down to it. It's a ridiculous question. How we reach out is the best we can. We try to be a good neighbor. We try to be a good brother. We try to put our fears, suspend our fears, and ask people to come to be a part of our church. And they might be, they might be someone we knew on our job, might be someone that we meet in a store and we have some sort of attraction, and then we feel some sort of resonance with them. This is how we do these things. Because we don't want to cast our pearls before swine. And we don't want to be goofy and have someone, think less of us and tear up our icon card that we just gave them. So we do the best we can. That's how we do it. We invite them to the feast. That's what our job is. Not to take care of them after. The guys invited to the feast, that's your job. That's our job. How do you reach out to African American people? The same way you reach out to hillbillies. The best you can. The best you can. That's what we do. Don't be confused. Don't be confused. Don't think that this is unusual ministry. If it's not universal, then something's wrong with it. Keep that in mind. If it's not universal, then something's wrong with it. We have a particular mission that we want to try and help the Lord out with in some way, is to maybe attract a certain group of people to the brotherhood. But already there are tons more white people. I don't know about tons, but tons of anything. There are more white people in the brotherhood than there are black anyway. So what we do is we try and reach out to people. That's part of we used to have a saying when I was young, that we would have these things called street missions, and we go out to look for people who are, perhaps, our brothers and sisters, and we'd have a certain mindset that we would, at least I would have a certain mindset that I would say, I'm going to go talk to that guy because maybe he has on a dashiki, because I like dashikis at the time. It's like African garb. Or maybe he has on a ring has a little something, just something that I could cling to, something that I could relate to. That's what we find here in the country. When we first moved back here, there was an old guy here who's he's an old horse trader. Actually, he's a blessed memory, and he was a dear friend of ours, and he was taking me around, showing me the sights of the town, which had changed since I'd been here. And I said, "Oh my goodness, who owns this greenhouse here?" And he goes, "Carl, they're not like you and I." He was my father's contemporary. "They're not like us." And I went, "Oh, really?" And I'm dressed with this robe on, and actually I had on a kamalafka, like a big priest hat, and robe and the whole thing. He said, "They're not like you and I." And I went, "What do you mean?" He goes, "They're Mormons." And I went, "Oh, I'm a you and I see." So there's certain things that we have that resonate with one another that's beyond the obvious. The obviously thinking, if you just look at the outer cover, he and I are not a you and I. So that's how we reach out to people. We do the best we can. We keep our eyes open. We keep our eyes open for all kinds of people. We keep our eyes open for any brothers and sisters that we have. We don't want to become thought of as being sort of Afrocentric. How shallow, how modern. We don't want to look at ourselves as being anything except Christocentric. And we look at this unbroken circle as having a center point in the circle. And we have all these brothers and sisters on the outside of that circle. And we have from the center to the to all the different people on that circle is the same distance from the center. That's being Christocentric. Was that too far-fetched? Or need I? Okay, good. So, at any rate, that's how we do it. We do the best we can. We try and be above this world. Don't identify with this world. Don't identify with it as best you can in your struggles. Don't say I'm a this. Don't say I'm a masker or I'm an anti-masker. Don't say I'm a this or that. If we're not more than that, my goodness, who wants to be a part of that? What young man who finds himself, such as I was, in the penitentiary would want to be a part of a group of people who were so shallow that they were just like the rest of the world? It was just like the rest of these people. It would make me cry. And it does make me cry to think about where have all those flower children gone? Did they become old? Did they become old and then just be like ones who revert to type? Did they become old and just become old guys like their dads and their moms? Or did they become people who had the striving for otherworldliness, who refused to settle down, who refused to believe that Saint Seraphim of Sarov didn't sit on a rock for 1,000 days, who refused to believe that the saints cast themselves down from the tower rather than lose their virginity, who refused to believe that Saint Moses said, "Let those who live by the sword die by the sword." That's the kind of men and women we are. We're not the ones who are involved with what the wisdom of this world has to offer. We flee from that. If we don't flee from it, we become ordinary people. And ordinary people, God bless us, ordinary people. Ordinary people, sometimes very far from that which the world longs for. So I'm telling you this, to be more than you are, to the very thing that you've longed to see in this world somewhere, the very thing that you've longed to witness, for you to become that very thing, to strive to become that very thing. It's not too lofty to think of yourself as being a saint in training. It's not too lofty to say things that are mighty and wonderful to your neighbor, so that they may be edified and you might come to the realization that you also embody it. You understand what that is? That is the kingdom of heaven. You embody the kingdom of heaven as brothers and sisters. Be good to one another. Don't let yourself be caught up in petty conversations with people about this world. When I was in the hospital, I'm ending with this. When I was in the hospital, I was on the other side. I was just in the hospital a week or so ago. And I was dying, I suppose, they said. And I couldn't breathe, and I was having a struggle from the other side. It was not this side's struggle. It was in a place that was so dark that it was unbelievable. And I was trying to say the Jesus prayer, but my air was gone, and they had to force oxygen into me because the oxygen through the nose didn't work. And the oxygen, and it only had enough time in the intervals for me to say, "Lord, have mercy." And every time I would say, "Lord, have mercy," these people that I had offended would come up, real life offenses. And they kept accumulating. And I didn't know what to do. How can I get out from under this? And then it occurred to me that I should say, Lord, have mercy again. And then the Lord forgave me those sins. And at one point, it was so normal to do that. And at one point, there was a voice that said to me from that dark place, yes, and you think you have a friend, you know, if you, Father Paisi, you think that he's your friend? Ha ha, he's not your friend. He hadn't even called you here. Hadn't even come by to see you. You have no friend. And then there was no purchase for that accusation to land upon. And my struggles were over. Now I had to only forgive people who I had offended. So I'm saying this to you. Be careful and be kind and be generous and don't be normal. Don't be normal, guys. All right. I'm sorry.
Amen. Father, will you close us in a prayer?
Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy upon us and strengthen us and keep us by your grace. And bless this gathering as we go to our homes. And bless us to be kind to one another and to forgive one another. And help us to know that it's better to enter into the kingdom of heaven having one leg than having two legs and being cast into hell. Having an eye than having two eyes and being cast into hell. Help us, O Lord, and strengthen us and keep us by your grace. We ask this in your holy name. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, now and ever into the ages of ages. Amen.